Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Kristen Seghetti from Niagara North Family Health Team. Welcome to Managing Burnout, Prioritizing Your Own Wellness. A few housekeeping rules. We are in the webinar format, so we can't see or hear you. There is the chat box if you feel like you want to ask any questions during the presentation, and we will save any more questions or Q&As to the end as well. The session is being recorded and will be sent out shortly after today or tomorrow to everyone who attended. So without further ado, let me welcome you to Managing Burnout and Prioritizing Your Wellness with Melissa and LeeAnn.
Thank you, Kristen.
Thank you, Kristen.
So I'm Melissa Bollinger, social worker at the Welland McMaster Family Health Team.
And I'm LeeAnn Pocknell, mental health nurse at the Welland McMaster Family Health Team.
Yes, and so we're talking about this topic of managing burnout. And one question was like, why this topic? And so I think it was, I don't know, several months ago, the health promoters across Niagara to all the Niagara FITs and CHCs polled their staff to find out what workshop would you most like. And the number one response was
Managing
burnout or prevention of burnout. 52%, that was the number one response. And just so you know, we were also those staff who were polled. So
I'm pretpretty sure I said managing
I
burnout
definitely
also.
was one of them. So just to pull the veil back, we also were wanting a workshop on burnout. So we're definitely not coming as experts. We're more here also had the chance to dig into the research and have a chance to share it with you, but certainly not a sense of we've got it cured. At least I don't.
I think some of this is about a reminder
Absolutely.
of things that we already know.
Absolutely. And why now, as probably all of you know, especially since the pandemic, burnout has become a worldwide phenomenon in the healthcare field. So it's an important one to look at and will be ongoing, I'm sure.
And since 2020, it's been the most studied issue.
Yeah.
So we had no problem finding literature and evidence on burnout.
Yes, absolutely. So we're going to start with the first poll. To hand it over to you, Kristen, just to name which organization are you coming from? And we'll just take a minute for that to come up and for you to put in your response.
They're lightning fast.
All right. Okay. People are fast. Awesome.
All right, I'm going to end the poll.
Okay.
Oh, wait, a couple more. It's long, so you might have to scroll down a bit if you're. Yeah. Almost 100%. Wait, one more. Oh, people are still logging in. Okay, ending poll. Let's share the results.
Okay. So,
Okay.
and I guess you can arrow down to see who else is here.
Yeah.
Awesome. Good to see who's
It's nice
here.
to know who's here.
Yeah, welcome to everyone.
Some of our team.
And I also just want to say, but to back up and maybe to highlight what you said, Kristen, too, to use the chat box. If there's thoughts that come to mind, questions, comments, we absolutely welcome that. Yeah, that's right. It's an anonymous, goes straight to Kristen. All right, so I think we're going to first hear from Bill.
Yeah, we are.
All right, let's get
Fourth floor, short stay unit. Where's your secret hospital bathroom? Dude, I'm not telling you. That would defeat the purpose of the Oh my God. Is that Bill? Yeah, I think it is. Hey, Bill, you doing okay, buddy? He's not looking too good. Wait a second, what's this? Oh, man. What is it? It's Bill's post-rounds to-do list. There's like 50 items, and none of them are checked off. Oh God, is he sick? I don't know, he didn't do his discharge summaries. He didn't consult PTOT on any of these patients. All right, we gotta get him some help. Go find a doctor who's good at diagnosing things. Okay, how about him? Ortho? Come on, man. Okay, how about him? An ophthalmologist without a scribe? That's worse than ortho. Wait a second. Bingo. Family medicine. Can you help? I don't know what's wrong with him. Oh, what? You mean Bill? Hey, he's got burnout. What? Burnout? Oh, yeah, I know that look. Yeah, Bill feels helpless and defeated in a system that doesn't value him or his well-being. Wait, are you sure? Yeah, you see his eyes? You see how empty they are? Yeah, that's burnout. Yeah. But why isn't he moving? Oh, yeah, with end-stage burnout, your muscles stop working. Why? Because it takes literally every ounce of energy you have left just to keep breathing. What do we do? Yeah, you gotta hit that button. I'm the CEO. How's he doing? Not good. I got you, Bill. Don't you quit your job on me. Oh, hello. I didn't see you there. I was just reading this book on success. You look a little burned out. I've got just the thing. A warm blanket, a hot cup of tea, and a 10-part workshop on resiliency. Over the next 2 weeks, you'll learn how you and you alone.
So welcome to part 1 of a 10-part series on burnout. We wanted to start this with a little bit of laughter. And it is very ironic that we're talking about burnout today, and here we are on an hour
Over your
burnout
lunch hour.
workshop over your lunch hour.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we're going to go over what does the literature say, what are science and contributing factors, hopefully moving quickly to identifying solutions. There's going to be a time at the end for comments, lots of questions. There will probably be no answers as far as I'm aware, and sharing solutions that will benefit all of us, hopefully. One thing just from that video too, he pointed out very well, it's a systemic issue and a system that doesn't value Bill's wellness. That's one piece. And then we're also going to look at what are personal things that we can do to help our own issue with burnout. Yep. All right. Right, moving along. So a couple days ago, Kristen sent out this question to all of you. What comes to mind when you think of burnout? And she made it into a word cloud, which is super cool. And we're really glad for all the responses we got. So let's just take a look at what you responded as to what came to mind.
Frustration.
Yeah, I mean, exhaustion jumps out to me, right? Like that's the biggest, maybe most referenced one, feeling tired.
Losing control.
A sense of heaviness, that's interesting.
Demotivated or unmotivated.
Yeah, short-tempered.
Feeling overwhelmed.
Yeah,
Overworked.
Joyless.
Yeah.
Overwhelmed, I hear that.
All of these words came out in the literature search that we did.
Absolutely, yeah.
So thank you very much for sending in your words for that.
Yeah, going to the next slide. So one thing that is tricky with burnout is that there's not one definition. There's a whole load of different definitions. So in fact, there's 142 different definitions of what burnout is. So it's also known as, a few of those definitions are compassion fatigue, occupational burnout, physician burnout, overwork syndrome. It's generally agreed that it's a job-related phenomenon related to overly stressful environment coupled with high ideals. I think you want to speak.
Yeah,
more to that
the
as
World
well.
Health Organization defined it this way: an occupational phenomenon common among healthcare workers resulting from chronic workplace stress that has not been successfully managed. So this year, the International Classification of Disease did add burnout to the 2022 guidelines, which aren't even out yet. But it is starting to be recognized and mostly in healthcare. So right now, of course, burnout is at an all-time high. I think we've seen that with the health promoters, just looking at some of the family health teams and the CHCs about what we're interested in and how we're feeling. And Melissa and I have talked about this a lot.
Mhm.
It is exacerbated by the politicization of COVID, of having to wear masks, vaccine status, what some organizations have done around mandatory vaccines, and other stressors that have happened, not just in COVID, but I think a lot of the coping skills have been taken away in COVID.
Mhm. And really, like, the research is really young. I mean, post this pandemic, right? In that there was research that we looked at of, post other epidemics
Yep.
and pandemics, but we're in a whole new phase of looking at this. And what we were reading was we're just kind of at the tip of the iceberg of looking at this issue since COVID and what it's done to the healthcare field. So lots of information coming out constantly on this.
And a lot of the literature that was that we looked at did characterize burnout into 3 categories.
That's right. So the 3 dimensions of burnout, and before
Kristen,
you
we
were, you were also sent the Maslow in burnout inventory.
yes.
Is that what you were going to say?
Yeah.
Yeah. So and that was in 3 different sections. If you went over those questions, and so they look at the one dimension is emotional exhaustion. Oh, you're saying kind of go to the next
We can
slide.
move Kristen to next slide.
Thank
Thanks.
you. Emotional exhaustion, detachment or depersonalization, and job dissatisfaction. Kind of the 3 main dimensions.
And I think what's interesting, and I think what we don't want to forget is these dimensions of burnout are not only affecting providers, healthcare providers, admin, management, but they're also affecting the patients.
Right.
And it is associated with depression, suicidality. We're seeing an increased number of physical symptoms, sometimes medical errors, clinical errors. And, I guess to go along with the job dissatisfaction, there's an imbalance between the work demands that we have and the rewards that we're getting. And that was consistent among the literature that we were looking at.
Absolutely.
And sometimes it's not only related to the clinical requirements that we have for our job, but also the non-clinical requirements, the increased or the numbers that are put on us. You must see 5 patients a day or 15 patients a day.
Yes, right.
Increased amount of charting, and I've heard from some physicians for 6 hours of patients that they're seeing, there's 6 hours of administrative work to do. So I think there's been an increased number of non-clinical expectations on us that have added to.
Absolutely. Yeah. And just to speak again, the emotional exhaustion part of it. So you might notice, you might show higher scoring in one versus another, right?
Yeah.
So if you're showing high on emotional exhaustion, you might be noticing just a sense of depletion, like exhaustion, fatigue, that kind of thing. The detachment, depersonalization, that might be showing up as like feeling really cynical or frustrated at your patients, or starting to treat them more like objects than people, because you're kind of at that point of being overwhelmed by of working with challenging patients, really, right? And job dissatisfaction, very closely linked. Like if you have a sense of, the research was showing, if you have a sense of futility in your work, or you're not seeing results, a low sense of personal accomplishment or low achievement, that can really impact job satisfaction.
And when we go back to the word cloud, I think people recognize the overwork, the demotivated, sometimes an increase of absence.
Yeah. And
Taking
just to
some time
say,
off.
like a lot of that, I think you touched on already too, is the type of patients that you see can really impact that sense of achievement or results. So if we have an influx now, right, of mental health, challenging mental health issues coming forward, and chronic conditions on the rise, right? So you're not going to see easy results with patients like that, and that can impact your.
And I think we're going to touch on that a little bit more also, because we are seeing people that can't afford their rents. The cost of groceries has gone up. So there's a financial insecurity that they didn't have before. And
absolutely.
Housing and.
Yeah. Next slide, please. So signs that you might notice in yourself. So if you have a sense of apathy, we talked about this, cynicism or negativity.
Increase making errors.
Absolutely.
Maybe putting a note in the wrong patient chart, or
there we have that,
feeling
depleted, tired again, angry,
irritable,
sleep
disruption.
The last one was a new one to me.
Yeah,
didn't know
the
that
World
one.
Health Organization added that to their definition
Mm.
about, and I mean, I guess it speaks to an increased amount of stress in our body, gastrointestinal
course.
issues, immune systems are down as a result of
For sure.
cortisol.
Yeah, very true. Also, you might notice that your poor coping strategies start showing up more, right? Like you might be drinking more, or you might be canceling on your, like not seeing
Yeah.
friends as much, or isolating a bit more, or that might be a sign that you notice in yourself.
And I
right?
think the other thing that was evident in the literature is often we're not finding this out for ourselves. Sometimes our family's seeing this before we're seeing this, or friends are seeing this before before we're recognizing it. So, another way to kind of be on top of whether or not burnout is impacting your life is to talk to your family and friends about it.
Yeah. Say, what do you notice in me when I'm burning? Which I did just ask this morning. I asked John, when I'm burning out at work, what do you first notice? That's kind of a dicey question to
I think
to
I'm a
ask.
little shorter with my son, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like,
well, and he said impatience. I know when
Yeah.
you start getting impatient that, okay, work is starting to burn you out,
Yeah.
right? And I'm a terrible listener when I'm in the burned out.
because
It's
you've
like,
been listening all day.
listen to it, and then I
Yeah.
am at home and I feel like I have nothing left for the people at home. And that's
Yeah.
a sign that I need to step back.
And
a
I
little
think
bit.
that's what was kind of good about us doing this workshop is we had the opportunity as we were going along to
Yes.
reflect on a lot of this stuff too.
That's right. All right, next.
So what
slide.
contributes to burnout?
Oh, and if there's any chats or any other comments, like definitely yell it out there, Kristen. So wait a second.
Yeah, 'cause
are
I'm
we
sure
at
we're-
external here. Yeah.
Um,
So we're looking at what contributes to burnout.
yeah, and these, I guess, are factors that are out of our control. Increased organizational demands. We kind of touched on that because I think some of these overlap with some of the signs and symptoms also. As we talked about, an increased number of challenging patients, both with chronic physical health conditions, chronic mental health conditions, adding the both together, patients are a lot more complex, I think, than they were. And some of that is related to the fact that our coping skills have been taken away in COVID. Decrease in respect from coworkers. We talked a little bit about, and this was evident in the literature too, some of the divisiveness around COVID, opinions about COVID and vaccine status, whether or not some people could work from home and other people could not work from home. It was evident that there was issues in between staff and the very place that we actually need the support.
Right.
There was some dividing in.
Well, they also talked too about just the the reality of isolation, that when we were not seeing each other in person,
Yeah.
that broke down morale on many teams, and so that was also when you're not in contact with each other, those relationships, those connections
Yeah.
can weaken. And that's definitely part of what happened
And being over
in
Zoom
this
isn't the
pandemic.
same.
No, it's not.
And I think we talked a little bit about this imbalance between effort and reward.
Good.
We can go to the next.
Oh, also, it's not on here, but also if you feel you have low control over your workload, like if someone else
yeah.
is controlling your workload, that's an external factor that can create a lot of stress. I think you talked to the other things there. If you're feeling micromanaged at work or a lack of flexibility, that can definitely be associated with high burnout as well. Internal factors. So this is looking at what we can do, or taking a little bit of a closer look at yourself, being a little bit more vulnerable. If you are someone, and this was all across the literature too, yes, the environment or the systemic is a real thing. That is a huge factor. But also, if you're someone who holds very high ideals or holds yourself to a very high standard, if you're perfectionistic, overachieving, that is linked with a chance for high burnout as well. Like these are good things, what I'd say, like being productive or achievement, it got you probably to where you are. And yet we have to be aware of when it goes too far, or when you're allowing that perfectionism, especially, to run you into the ground. So having self-awareness around that. Also, if work is your life, if that's your main identity, they were showing that is also linked with high burnout.
And I think the other thing about internal factors is where we're at in our career, what stage, if we're the primary breadwinner, if there's children at home,
if they're young children at home, that your burnout, it's really how much pressure you have outside of work as well, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
and those
and that was
external factors, especially around COVID and maybe even teaching your kids at home, those external factors turned into internal factors.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, and you were going to speak to the women. If you're a woman,
Oh,
you're
yeah.
higher risk of burnout. Also,
So a lot
What are
of
the other
a
things?
lot of the literature also talked about identifying the highest risk groups for
Right.
burnout.
Yeah.
People of color, women, and 2S LGBTQI.
Mhm.
So I think it's important to note.
Absolutely. There's so many factors around that. As
And
well.
I think the other thing about work as your life is, me and Melissa talked a lot about this, is what's the first thing that somebody asks you when you meet?
Yeah.
What do you do? for
What
a
do you
living?
do?
What do you do?
Yeah.
So when all I am is a nurse,
Yeah.
and I am not a mother and a friend and a volunteer
Mhm.
and
A gardener or a mediocre tennis
a
player
dog
or
walker,
World Cup fan, like a
used
singer,
to play,
whatever your
yes.
other identities are so important to nurture, right? Yeah. Dog walker, is that what you said?
Yeah.
Yes.
or
That's my job too.
actually the dog walks me.
Yeah,
So.
exactly. More factors. All right, you're going to start us off with that one.
So the very nature of the work we're in healthcare is life and death,
Yeah, right.
both in mental health and in physical health.
Mm.
So, just the
Mhm.
very nature of that makes us at increased risk for burnout.
Mhm. I think in healthcare we have this we said culture of stoicism, and maybe it's different on different teams, but I think we can really fall prey to the feeling of we have to look like we have it together. We're the helpers. We help other people. I can never admit that I need help, which is such a lie.
Yeah.
Like there will always be a time where we're on the other side of the table. But I think in our profession, it's very hard to admit that,
Yeah.
and we'll look at that a little bit further. But we can feel like we have to hide behind the image of
We're okay.
I've got it all
I
together.
have to have it together.
Not yet.
Oh, brother.
Sorry, I was
And-
trying to unmute myself and I just scrolled. We have a question, or we have a comment
Sure.
actually.
Sure.
Great.
Please.
One of the participants said, "That's why I never ask, what do you do? I usually try to say, what do you do for fun?"
Oh, I love that.
Yes.
We talked about that because I actually have started saying,
Yeah.
are you happy? Not,
Right.
what do you do for a living?
Yeah. Oh, I like that. What do
Yeah,
you
me
do for
too.
fun? That's
Yeah, what do you do
lovely.
for fun? And what's
Yeah.
funny is in the social work intakes that I do, the last question is always, what do you do for fun? And I bet 80% of people say, first it catches them off guard. Then
They're
they
like,
say
what's fun?
nothing.
Oh man. Yeah.
And then that's a segue to say, well, maybe that's one of the issues.
Yeah, for sure.
We have to find time.
Thank you. Yeah, for that comment. And anyone, please jump in. That's great.
Yes.
So the other thing I was saying before too about there can be the feeling of, well, implications of sharing if you're feeling burned out or if you're struggling. In our culture at your job, it can feel like, oh, how will my coworkers think of me differently, or what will my boss think if they know that I'm struggling? And that can keep you from sharing, which actually increases your chance of burnout, unfortunately, right?
Yeah.
But again, that also speaks to we were saying about licensing for physicians. I don't know.
Actually, I wanted to talk about,
Yeah.
we came across a cross-sectional study of physicians
Yeah.
from like 2013 to 2019. There was
Mhm.
560-ish.
Mhm.
And they really looked at mental health. And 98, believe it or not, 98% of the physicians self-reported a risk for suicide on an anonymous survey. So the risk was intermediate to high, and only 40% of people in the survey sought treatment. So, and I mean, I didn't know the answer to this, but what is the implication of doing something or acknowledging on licensing?
Yeah.
So I didn't have enough time to look into that. I'm not sure with.
Yeah, we don't have the answer on that. Like, is there an implication on licensing if you're seeking treatment or have a mental health diagnosis? But that's a huge concern. And then also we looked at, like, you may be having confidentiality concerns of sharing that, right?
Right.
Also, other factors are lack of communication or support from your manager. And also if you're a lack of role clarity, like if you're being asked to do things outside of your scope of practice, or uncertain on your role, that can also contribute to burnout. All right. So what is the impact on us of burnout? So more likely to report depression, like you said, high suicidality or consider suicide, might be needing more time off work. You talked again to when if you have stress in your body, you're going to have elevated
levels.
cortisol, changes in glucose. Do you want to take it from me?
Increased coronary events. And again, that's related back to cortisol and stress.
Yeah.
Increase in substance use. You know, I work with people who in our field that are dealing with issues that sometimes it's difficult to cope with, and to go home and have a drink or 2 or 3 and not talk about this, you know, that ends up becoming problematic. Stress on relationships.
Absolutely.
You know, just like you said, you come home and all of a sudden we're not listening, or
exactly.
And I mean, I'm sure
I'm
this is not an exhaustive list.
Oh, I'm sure not. Yeah, I'm sure people could add a lot more to that of what you've noticed yourself, right?
Yeah.
We're going to move to the importance of protective factors. And this first list, I think we were saying, is kind of more what you have, right?
Yes.
We're looking more at the individual right now. We're going to move to organizational as well. But so if you have a sense of identity that's larger than your work,
We
that's
talked
going
about
to
that a
help
little
you.
bit, yeah.
If you have a sense of grit or perseverance, and there's a whole bunch of research behind what that means, but if you have that in you, that helps you. Resiliency.
Resilient. There's a workshop on resiliency next week.
A 10-part. I think a lot of us are tired of that word. It's overused, right?
Yeah, it really is.
But
the evidence shows.
That's right. If you have a high level of social
support,
absolutely.
And I think that social support is also peer support.
Yeah.
Like, it's not just outside of work. It's so important that we have that inside of
definitely. Work. Like they were saying that so clearly, like it's often like you can share with your people at home or a good friend, but it's just not the same as that when you share with colleagues who get it, who are in the same work, that helps tremendously.
Yeah.
Psychological flexibility. I really liked this one. This is I'll just read off sort of what that means. Flexible. So ability to disengage with the stressful moment and try to establish another perspective. So this is like catching yourself. Let's say you're in the midst with a challenging patient or with a high stress moment. Can you, in that very moment, be able to take a step back and see a wider perspective and kind of take care of yourself in that moment? And there was a good research. I'll read off what the quote was, but it's the ability to reframe your thinking before you get overwhelmed, catching yourself before you're triggered to the overwhelmed state. So this was done with a group of residents, and this is what one of them shared. I place myself in the big picture, step back and say, okay, let's take a few deep breaths. Where am I at? Let's stick to the goal, which is to help people be healthy with realism, right? Like being realistic about it. We can't fix everything, right? Temporarily disengaging from the stressful situation and taking on a new perspective helped residents manage moments that felt insurmountable. I thought that was an interesting one for sure. And then we've talked about this one, but how you view your job.
Is it a calling? Why did I get into nursing?
Yeah.
Was I forced into it? Was there an expectation of me getting into nursing, or even physician or social work?
Yes, yeah, exactly. And if, like we were saying before too, what the story I tell myself about my job impacts how I feel about it. So, and I know absolutely for myself, when I'm feeling burned out and someone says, oh, you know, how is it? I'll say, oh, it pays the bills. You know, or I feel like that cynicism, or I'm like, oh, mental health counseling, you know, I have this, but the more I say that's what it is, oh, it pays the bill, that feeds that sense of burnout in me, versus if I'm connected to, okay, it's purposeful work, it's meaningful work. There's a reason why, or like you said, it's a calling or a vocation. If you are connected to that sense, that will help lower your burnout.
Yep. And of course, supportive and understanding management.
Yeah. Next slide, please.
So I guess this is really calling on the leaders to look at what they can do in organizations to help staff maybe not be as burned out, because although there are some things personally that we can do or that we have, we need support from the organizations. I looked at some of this, build a burnout strategy for your team. There's actually organizations out there that you can hire that will come into your organization and build that strategy. If you don't have what's the word? If you don't have it at your fingertips to be able to do yourself, there's lots of places out there that can help. Be tuned into your staff. Talk to them. You know, it's interesting because we talked about this too.
Yeah.
It's often that staff may not go to management to say, listen, I am feeling burned out, or I do not want to see this many patients today. We need the flexibility to be able to say, I know for myself what I need, and we need the support of the
So I like what you're saying, like for them to realize your staff are probably quite hard workers, overachieving. What was the other one? Having high ideals, and it would be a hard time to volunteer that information to you. So to be tuned into that, and to think of, well, what kind of question could I ask? I'd say to tune in, like, how are you doing? How is your energy level? How is it meeting with this many patients? Like, that it may not be shared with you, or there may be a lot of hesitancy from your staff to share that with you.
You guys have sparked a lot of questions.
Oh, yay! I have no answers.
We have no answers.
But
the first one is, how does someone learn to be resilient? I feel like to some people, resiliency is a natural reaction to life, where some people just aren't like that. Can someone train themselves to be resilient?
It's a good question.
Does anyone have an answer for that? I mean, did you want to start? Or?
No, go ahead. Be my guest.
Well, just what pops to my mind is like there is part of it is what you're born with, right? And like we were saying, even like a happiness factor, we're born in different levels of happiness. I forget what it was called, but it's still up to you to move yourself up to your high level of happiness. I would say the same with maybe resiliency, that you may be born with low, medium, high resiliency, but it's still up to you to move yourself to the top end of that resiliency. And I think, I mean, maybe I'm biased, but like going to counseling and meeting with someone and saying, this is my goal, I want to work on how to be more resilient. And that's, could be a lot of working on, thinking through it, exposure therapy, CBT, mindfulness, that kind of thing is what comes to mind for me.
I was kind of thinking along the same lines, because there has been a lot of research done in resiliency in nursing students. And we were actually having a conversation about this a couple of weeks ago in class. And, some of it is about being aware before things start building on each other. So when I am I don't want to get to the point where I need 3 weeks off. I want to get to a point where, listen, I am starting to feel like, I've recognized some things at home. I've recognized some things at work. I don't want to talk to another patient. I need a day off. So some of it is about good practice. And again, I want to make sure that we're not putting this all on individual staff to say, you're responsible for your burnout. But when we did look at the literature,
that's the
really,
risk that
resiliency,
runs, right?
I know,
putting it on the person. But I like what you said, like the part that you can work on is to know your own early signals of burnout. And
that's self-reflection.
Yeah. Does anyone else have an answer?
Yeah, somebody else can answer.
Or thoughts on that? Or are there more questions, Kristen?
What advice do you have on how to disclose to a colleague you are struggling with burnout, but are concerned it will be a sign of weakness, or they will lose respect you'll lose respect from others?
Yeah, I mean, so that is such a common feeling. And for me, like I found, you start with who you feel safest with. So this is another thing of building. This is another thing for leaders to also take note of, like, how do you build psychological safety for your staff and as a team? And it's hard. And so you may not start with some people you may feel more comfortable with than others. So you pick a person, a colleague that you feel safe with to start with. right? To say, you know what, I'm gonna, let the facade down and I don't have it all together and I'm struggling in this way. That's really, yeah, like how do you, and I think too, like just to notice, this is a common feeling of like, if I share, then that's a sign of weakness. That is false, right? That's a false, your thinking brain. Like I want to go into CBT kind of talking, but that's just a thought, right? The actual, if you look into what is actually strength is being able to say when you're not feeling strong. There's so much on vulnerability. If you look into, I'm thinking of Brené Brown's work on vulnerability and sharing, just that's an old, I almost feel like that's also the culture that we live in of got to keep that stoic persona, look like you've got it together, that equals strength. No, it doesn't. That's a very flimsy definition. That's a very thin definition of strength and a very thin definition of weakness.
Right.
To share when you're struggling. No, that's called being human.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, it really is.
Do you think
There's
different
other
age
tests,
groups vary in burnout and what they can cope with? For an example, old school was to keep going, whereas today we say no, can't, we need help, we need to rethink.
What was the beginning of that
Yeah,
question?
I
I think I missed it.
Do you think different age groups vary in burnout and how they cope?
Oh, geez.
I'm afraid to answer that question.
Yeah,
Too. Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of
This is being recorded.
there's a lot of feeling around, like almost labeling different generations of people. Is that what they're getting at?
Yeah.
Like, oh, well, this age group of people, we're more,
They don't cope
we
as
push
well.
through, and then this age group of people, they, need all this. I would really, I don't know what to say about that. I think there's so many factors that play into why different age groups, experience it differently. Stress or how they handle stress, like what were blind spots of previous ways, like I think they said the old way was push through.
Yeah.
But to what extent, like to what end, you don't get to hear from the people who had that way and then really fell apart.
Right.
And were unable to go back to their previous self because they keep push, right? But then you have the opposite, I guess you're pointing to the opposite side of like when people don't realize how strong they really are and that life is stressful and it is hard, especially if you're doing a work like if you're doing meaningful work, it's going to be hard. Right? So how do we also know when, okay, right now this is the time for grit and resiliency? It's very tricky.
So some people, the one person said, I'm not labeling, she understands it was just her question. One said that they think all age groups have different coping skills. Someone else said, I do feel myself that as I've aged, I deal with burnout differently than when I was younger. And I have learned as I age to lean on others more than I did before. And someone else said, I think that the newer generations know limits, where older ways was not to complain and keep going. And someone else said, I don't think different age groups are better or worse with burnout, but how they deal with it is very different. I think of ghosting, comments coming in. I think of ghosting being the recent term that was never used in the past when it comes to coping.
Ghosting.
I think someone else said, I think it's important to note that being here together is a rare moment in and of itself. Resiliency and burnout are often seen as individual strengths and fault, and the apple falls one by one. We don't look at the tree and its roots. Bonus of individuality in healthcare as a practitioner can be a problem because we are supposed to be team-based. Resiliency comes from a lot of outside aspects of the job: social status, housing, education, health status. The fact that we have had a trend on pushing blame on colleagues, calling them lazy, unprofessional, is a fatal flaw in our base philosophy of work and culture and society.
Yeah. Beautifully said.
Yeah.
Yes to all of those. Thank you so much. Is that all of them, Kristen?
I think so. Hang on. One more. Circling back, to add to advice when talking to a coworker, is starting off with what they are looking for: support versus advice. Often
yes.
people mean well, but they don't know what to give you when you share.
Unsolicited advice. Yeah.
Yes, beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
I just like being able to say, I just need you to listen. I don't want, oh, have you tried,
Yeah.
have you tried yoga? Have you tried time in nature?
Have you tried the box breathing?
No, you don't want that.
No,
Absolutely. Box.
um, Jim just commented, he said, identifying this workshop will help support all of us who care for others, and turning up today is a great way to build your resiliency.
Yes, absolutely.
All right, I'm gonna let you guys keep going.
Oh my gosh, I love that. I
Yeah,
almost want
that
to turn
is
it over to
wonderful.
everyone. I can see anyone.
Yes.
I want to go to personal solutions because I know our time is marching on here. And again, this runs the risk of, have you tried yoga? Do you
Yeah.
sneak a little kale in there?
We can move on, Kristen, to the
to the
next.
personal solutions. These are things that we all know. This is not going to come as new to you. These are things that we can do. How is your sleep? How's your nutrition? Physical activity? Growing your own self-awareness, right? Like, is my perfectionism getting out of hand? Don't let that run you into the ground. Again, the peer support is huge. Nurturing your larger identity. Reframe your thinking. Look at your work-life balance. Yeah. Reduce administrative demands on yourself. Access counseling and support if needed.
Those are pretty simple.
Yeah, that's.
You want me to roll into LeeAnn? Sorry.
You can't go wrong with LeeAnn.
Okay, I'll roll into LeeAnn here.
Okay.
Let's go.
So there's 4 stages to this methodology, and I promise you it's simple. And I'm also not going to stand up here and say, this is what you've got to do. You've got to get an extra 2 hours sleep. You've got to meditate 20 minutes in the morning, 20 minutes in the afternoon. You've got to be running in the morning, yoga in the afternoon. I'm not going to tell you that. So the stages are these. The first one is predict. When are the next big events coming up for you, professionally and personally? Second stage is prepare. And I'm going to give you some very practical takeaway tips on sleep, mental health, and energy within that phase. Third phase is perform, and that's about respecting your red flags. And the final stage is arguably the most important, which is recover. But it might just be slithers, little slithers of recovery, because I believe that when you back off, even momentarily, that helps to beat burnout.
When are your Wimbledons? When are your next big events? And that could be professional, it could be personal, it could be a major goal. But when are your Wimbledons? What are the next big events that are coming up in the next 4, 6, 8, 12 weeks?
So what did I learn? I learned that when you get into your discomfort zone and you push yourself through things that you don't want to do, I hate saying magic happens, but everything you do after that is easier because you've built resilience, spiritual, emotional, mental, physical resilience, and you achieve things that you didn't think you could.
Let's reconnect with our bodies in a primeval way and make fitness something that we all do because of how it makes us feel. Perfect doesn't exist, but happy and healthy does.
Be aware of what those signals are. Try and become self-aware enough to know what those signals are, those red flags that indicate you might be pushing a bit too hard, so you can put the brakes on before it gets any worse. And that's respecting your red flags.
And that's the importance of recovery. Backing off beats burnout. Little slithers of recovery, little slithers of box breathing, of meditation, slithers of natural light.
And we heard about LeeAnn, and she came along and did a talk about her business athlete methodology, and it really hit the nail on the head in terms of what people were looking for. Lots of people I could see going up and speaking to LeeAnn, so she's really made a difference already to people. So I'd really recommend getting LeeAnn along to your conference if you need someone to do that.
That's it. Thank you very, very much.
You want to say anything to the end of that one, LeeAnn?
I don't think so. I think there was, what's coming up? Christmas is coming up.
Oh, looking ahead, I like that, right?
Yeah, me
of knowing what's coming up and preparing yourself for that, right? I think I definitely could use advice around that. I liked her a bit about slivers of recovery.
Yep.
Like instead of thinking I need to work until I'm, like you said, burned out, I need 3 weeks off. Instead, knowing your signals early, taking small breaks, backing off in kind of small ways. I liked that.
And I like the fact that that she was also talking about, no, I forget,
Did you forget it?
Yeah, I
Oh,
did.
shoot, okay.
just like
Well,
that.
It's
It was
it's
really
in the
good
video.
too.
You really
Yeah.
liked it. Okay.
Okay, yeah, I did.
We're at the near the end of our time. This is just a chance to share what strategies work for you when you're first noticing. So right now we're talking about the personal. We're not looking at the systemic, but for you, what helps you when you're feeling burned out? Any further comments? Any questions?
Well, there could be some systemic, because there could be some leaders here that.
Right, or changes that they want to
Yeah.
make, for sure, absolutely. And then just the resource that is there for healthcare professionals in Ontario is yourspace.ca is a good one to check out. And are there comments or questions?
There's one that says, I like boundaries. No is a complete sentence sometimes.
Yes. That is so good. I don't think we mentioned that was a huge part of the research too, is
Yeah.
that you will need to work on setting boundaries at work, right? To say what you will and will not do. And if you're seeing too many patients, if you have the control to say, no, I cannot do this, and to stand behind that decision. Or the type of patient, like you might say, I cannot see 3 mental health patients in an afternoon, or whatever it might be, that is your knowing who drains you or what drains you the most, right? And putting limits on it.
And that's the difficult part for a lot of people, right? Is actually saying. So I may have some awareness around it, but saying it, and then getting the support for it.
And then to actually be backed up for that, for sure. Yeah.
Slivers of strategy, naps. I can do anything all day long if I can get 15 and 20-minute nap in.
Brilliant. Yeah. Excellent.
Laughter. I like to watch comedy specials rather than something heavy.
Yes. That's how I like it in the evening. I'm like, I can only do stand-up comedy, light, funny stuff. Like I cannot watch anything heavy and afterward, for sure. I think we're gonna close, and then Kristen, do you want to take it over about the survey that's coming up? What do we miss? No, we took that out.
Oh, right.
Okay.
It's gone. Never mind.
Stop. There we go. Okay, so once the webinar ends, there will be a survey that will pop up, and if you don't complete it now, it will be emailed to you tomorrow as well. So thank you so much for presenting, LeeAnn and Melissa, for being voluntold, and
Thank
you. Really we really appreciate all your hard work, and thank you for everyone for joining us today. We really appreciate it as well, and we hope you enjoyed it. Oh, there's comment. Thank you very much. They love this. Yeah, so hopefully we can do something like this again. Maybe you guys can watch next time. And
that'd be great. I would like to go to someone else's. Me too. Someone else's webinar on this.
Absolutely. All right, so I'll end the webinar and the recording. We'll send out the recording probably tomorrow. And thank you, everybody, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you. Thanks.
Thank
Bye.
you.
That's great.